Hey, Mike, thanks for being with us on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
To get things going, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. My name's Mike Pedrick. I'm a hopelessly addicted car nut, as well as a cybersecurity and risk consultant. And I'm also a trainer in the cybersecurity space. I'm accredited with APMG to teach multiple certifications on behalf of ISACA. I also teach some CompTIA content and ISC squared content as well.
Awesome. I'm always interested in the genesis story of guests on the podcast. I'm curious how you first got interested in computers and how did you turn that into a career in cybersecurity?
It's sort of a circuitous path. I thought I wanted to be an architect right out of high school. And I recognized that, or at least I thought I recognized that going into that career field would open doors from a financial perspective. Just a means for having a career as opposed to having a job, again, right out of high school. And so I spent a couple of years in architectural design before realizing that I don't care about design as much as one would need to be a successful architect. And so that was right about the time, the dot-com boom period. And so there was a high degree of attraction to information technology. Uh, Transitioning from IT to information security, however, that was, more of I was audited, I guess, is the bottom line. And my security program was hot garbage. So I realized that if I was ignorant to some of the more nuanced expectations from an information security perspective, then I would have bet others in my situation and my demographic and my organizational structure, hierarchy, et cetera. They were probably ignorant to those things as well. And so that pushed me full time into consulting and specifically in security. And there I've been ever since.
Ah, interesting. So the reason I asked you on the show is because you have a really interesting focus or overlap with some of your skills, which I think you alluded to in your introduction. You have some expertise in both cybersecurity and electric vehicles. How did those two things come to share space in your life?
I bought one. I bought a EV, and
Yeah.
I was instantly thrust into the world of all my gearhead car buddies that I've spent time with over the decades, turning wrenches on very loud, very fast, very I will say pollution friendly vehicles. And suddenly I have this electric vehicle. Suddenly I'm the guy driving around on a large battery. And so I was defending myself from my gearhead compatriots and then defending my gearhead compatriots from the EV crowd pretty quickly. And it's just a part of our nature, I think, in this particular space that we can't not learn about a thing once it's a part of our orbit.
Hacker's gonna hack, right?
Yeah, also that. Yep.
I find this topic incredibly interesting because there's a huge push for adoption, and manufacturers are rushing to cram as much technology as they can into these vehicles. And if history has taught us anything, when there's a big rush to get technology to market, security is often an afterthought. For context, there were 10.5 million electric vehicles sold in 2022, and that number is projected to grow to over 31 million in 2027, and then over double that to 74.5 million by 2035. And according to a recent Deloitte report on cybersecurity concerns in the automotive industry, 84% of attacks on vehicles were done remotely, and 50% of those attacks were done in the past 2 years. All of this data and the kinetic potential of these devices make the whole thing a little terrifying to me. At a very high level, what are your thoughts on the state of security for the onboard computers and networks being used to create these fleets?
So first and foremost, I think you sort of nailed it, right? That as we rush to introduce something to the market, the first handful of generations of that particular thing suffer from just not knowing any better, right? I also want to put out there, though, that if we look at EV companies as falling into one of two buckets, the traditional automakers who are rolling out EVs in response to growing demand for EVs versus organizations that were created specifically in the EV space, like Tesla, Rivian,
Mhm.
and so on. One of the more important distinctions is that when we look at Ford or we look at GM or we look at traditional automakers, they have been building cars for decades and over a
Mhm.
century in a couple of those cases. With companies like Tesla or Rivian, they are predominantly technology companies that are building cars. And so they don't have that history of building a vehicle. They do have history with software and software development practices. Unfortunately, translating software into the physical world historically has not been perfect, right? We see that even in traditional automakers, where we would often look to the proprietary infotainment system on those vehicles. Again, internal combustion engine vehicles, any vehicle is fair game, and think to ourselves, boy, that's just a mess. It's a good thing you do cars well. You don't do software well. And
Yeah.
so I think that we're seeing sort of that confluence of organizations like Tesla and Rivian feeling out their steps in a new world for them. And there's going to be some pitfalls. There's going to be some things that looked good on paper, but in the real world just did not work so well. They'll find that out. They'll adjust. Hopefully, they'll adjust and do better the next time around. Subsequent generations will improve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one point of vulnerability I found while researching for this interview, which was a bit of surprise for me, was that charging stations are susceptible to attack and have been successfully compromised in a bunch of different cases in the wild. Most of it has been innocuous, hackers making the charging stations display pornography and stuff like that. But there appears to be a real threat there, everything from exposing customer data to bringing down the power grid. Are you familiar with any of the risks here?
I am, yeah. And it's obvious that, we've been saying for years in our particular industry that as soon as we connect to the internet, risk ratchets up accordingly, right? As soon as we're connected, that interconnectivity piece is a core source of the risk to those environments. And for better or for worse, everything has to be connected anymore, from thermostats to charging stations to our cars. There's just this massive drive from the business perspective, and I would argue by extension from the consumer perspective, for things to be connected to the internet. Well, that makes them susceptible, and it makes them attractive to hackers and opportunists and nation state actors and so on and so forth. Now, in terms of charging stations, we have a couple of things coming together simultaneously. The first is that they are new technologies. They potentially have vulnerabilities that had not even been considered previously, because this is a pioneering industry to some extent. But also they're attractive because number one, power. Number two, the representative destructive value, right? Now, as you said, there's some things that are innocuous. Walking up to a charger and something's playing on the screen that shouldn't be, or that's not expected. Okay, come on. Nobody's going to lose sleep over this. That's yeah, as you said, innocuous. But also, to your point, imagine going from minor annoyance, i.e. saying a charging station is not available to somebody who is rolling in on whatever the equivalent of electric vehicle fumes are, and now they can't charge their vehicle because the charging station's been compromised. That's annoying, but crashing the grid as a result of turning up the wick on a charging station or something similar, that has very real implications. And you can imagine ideological perspectives, motivating somebody to do such a thing. And I hasten to advocate for something as rudimentary as, we just need to take them off the grid. They can't be connected to the internet anymore. They can't be, that's the safest thing. Just make them autonomous, systems unto themselves. That's kind of goofy too, right? I fully acknowledge the convenience of, and in fairness, mine is a Tesla. So I plug into the system. I don't take out a credit card. I don't do anything. I plug it in. I sit in my car for 15 minutes. I unplug it and I drive off again. I've gotten awfully accustomed to that, maybe painfully accustomed to that. And so if that wasn't an option anymore, even as a security measure or a privacy protection measure, which I would fully support, I'd still be annoyed enough that I might consider going back to the traditional model of gas stations and internal combustion engines.
Yeah, the power attack grid scenario comes from the fact that remote hackers could turn the chargers on and off, and most people plug their cars in overnight. So by switching massive amounts of chargers on and off, you could create like turbulence in the grid and take it right down. So I'm not speaking for public charging stations, but the recommendations for consumers is to not connect their home chargers to the internet, which I didn't even know was a thing. So
It is, and it's interesting that I bought a connector, a wall connector for my home use. So I charge at home, and when it was installed, that was the first thing that I noticed as I was reading the documentation. It said it must be connected to the internet. I fancy myself a savvy sort of cat. The first thing I did was carve off a part of my network that was dedicated solely to this device. Doesn't share any space other than geography with other systems on my network. But the whole time I was thinking to myself, for what? I mean, the obvious use case would be data analytics from Tesla's perspective. They want to know how often are you charging, what's the quality of the charging apparatus, et cetera. But we know there's other business focused needs there, right? But what if I don't? What if I just don't plug this thing into the internet? What if I just use it for electricity? Isn't that what it's for? I couldn't imagine buying a new iPhone or something along that line and being told that the charging cable for the iPhone had to be connected to the internet. That would just blow my mind.
Right. Yeah, and this probably goes back to some of the privacy concerns that people have with these systems, is like all that metadata that companies are able to collect about, behaviors and in usage and stuff like that.
100%.
So another vulnerability I was reading about that applies to electric vehicles, which is somewhat familiar and I think applies to much more than electric vehicles, is a Bluetooth relay attack. I even saw some videos on YouTube of people doing this to steal cars. Can you explain this one to our listeners and how it can be used against electric vehicles?
Yeah, it's super easy. So let's start out by setting the tone. So Bluetooth is the underlying technology for so many things in our lives anymore. When you have wireless AirPods or earpods, and there's no wire connected to that device and your phone or you're listening, whatever it is you're listening from or listening to, primarily that's Bluetooth. It's a very easy, very quick, very low, I'm going to say low effort, low power wireless connectivity mechanism. Well, as we've gotten accustomed to transitioning from, I'm going to go way back now, the days when we had a key ring with two keys on it, one key for the ignition and the other key for the doors.
For the doors, yeah.
Yeah, people listening know how old I am now by this point. So anyway, we transitioned from that to a key with a key fob. You unlocked the car, disabled the alarm, put the key in the ignition and turned it. Well, as we've progressed from that up through keyless entry to where we just keep a fob in our pocket, open the door and get in the car, the natural progression from there was, hey, how about we just eliminate the fob, right? We're all walking around with smartphones in our pocket capable of Bluetooth connectivity. And the phone, you authenticate to the phone, there's that piece done. And now the phone can authenticate to the car. And now you don't need a fob, you don't need a key. You need you and your phone, and you can get in your car and you can drive off. That's awesome. And there's been strong response on the part of the consumers that's what we want. That's fantastic. It's one less thing I got to put in my pocket. I'm good with that, right? Unfortunately, the Bluetooth connection itself is not, there's not a high degree of authentication required there, right? You just come near it. And like imagine the difference here, and people will recognize this. If you take out your phone and it's in sleep mode or whatever, you have to authenticate to it. You have to, put your thumb on the sensor or look at the thing or enter your code. You have to authenticate to get into the phone. But when you have when you're using your phone as your key to go to your car, you don't have to do that. Your arms are full of groceries. This is part of the benefit of the thing. You just get your phone close enough in proximity to the vehicle and the doors are unlocked and you can get access to the vehicle. You don't have to authenticate to your phone to then get into the vehicle. Well, Bluetooth, and part of the reason why that's favorable is Bluetooth has a very short range. You can't get more than just a couple of meters away from the vehicle before that signal isn't strong enough for it to actuate. Insert relays here, right? So if you have your vehicle out at the end of your driveway or on your driveway and you're sitting in your living room watching television, in that scenario all by itself, you're not close enough to your vehicle for the vehicle to recognize your phone and unlock. But potentially, of course, distances vary, right? Mm-hmm. But if I'm an attacker, if I'm bent on stealing the vehicle, I can put myself in between you and your vehicle with a relay, boost that Bluetooth signal from your device, and get access to your vehicle. And then it should be relatively academic from there to leave with it, because existing, part of that process is your Bluetooth connection, the existence of your phone within proximity of your vehicle, doesn't just unlock the vehicle, it also authorizes the starting of the vehicle. Now, I've always felt that, you're not going to get a second chance, right? Somebody comes up, they steal your vehicle. The next time they shut that car off, now they got to do something else, because you can't relay indefinitely from a phone to, miles and miles away. But they got it away from you. And that's what matters to us as consumers.
Yeah, and that car probably went right onto a shipping container and then overseas to where they have the processing facilities to turn that into a brand new consumer vehicle, right?
Right. Well, and actually, it's even easier. There's mechanisms for communicating with the ECU and other individual devices, modules within the vehicle, anywhere that the CAN bus can be accessed. And as devices or components of vehicles have gotten more sophisticated over the years, there's that constant signal back and forth to the ECU. Well, either the ECU or the body control module or the transition control module, depending on what it is we're talking about. But I'll leave that alone for a second. Try to imagine, right? You've got window modules. These actuate the windows. Window goes up, windows go down if you hit the button. But because they're individualized modules with unique identifiers as far as the ecosystem of the vehicle is concerned, you could take the actuator out of the driver's side door, install it in the passenger side door, and when you hit the button on the passenger side door, the driver's side window still goes down, because the system recognizes that module belongs to the driver's side, not the passenger side, right? And so as things have gotten more sophisticated in that way, thieves have figured out that if we can get access to the CAN bus, we've got total control over the vehicle. And that CAN bus is accessible anywhere there is a device that has that hard line back to the ECU or body control module, etc. Headlights, tail lights. These are things that can be removed very quickly from the outside of the vehicle, and somebody can jack into that bus and issue commands, unlock the doors, start the engine, whatever. So I'm always imagining to myself that these thieves understand this dynamic well enough. They can do a very low risk, it's not loud at all, Bluetooth relay process, get into your vehicle, drive off, and the next thing they're going to do is compromise whatever they need to get access to the CAN bus, and then it's their vehicle. They can do whatever they want with it.
Yeah, wow. I the YouTube video I saw really blew my mind. I think it was like a Ring doorbell video, and it showed one guy down on the street waiting at the car, and the other guy ran up to the door to get close to whoever, like you said, was sitting on the couch in the living room and had an antenna sticking out of his backpack. And then the other guy got into the car, started it. The one guy at the door ran down, jumped in, and they were gone in 30 seconds or less. It was something else. Yeah. And it was a Mercedes too, which you would expect would have a high level of security, but this is obviously a big flaw in that model.
Well, and it's interesting because when researchers brought this up to Tesla, and I want to be judicious about how I say this. Tesla is similar to Microsoft in that everybody wants to take a shot at the champ. I'm going to use that phrasing rather audaciously. So researchers brought it up to Tesla that they could get into the vehicle with nothing more than a Bluetooth relay attack. And Tesla's response, which I think everybody bristled at initially, was, well, that's always going to be a risk. It just is a thing. Well, what do you expect us to do about this? Case closed. And initially, again, I think we all bristled. Even as a Tesla owner, I was like, wow, really? You're not going to do anything about this? But with the technologies that we have available today, as well as the practical realities, we got people who won't do multi-factor authentication on sensitive data. Do we think we're going to make them actually take their phone out of their pocket and authenticate before the car accepts them into the into the vehicle? This is not going to be a thing. Customers will revolt. So I think it's just a thing where we have to have compensating controls. Leaving your Mercedes out on your driveway, maybe don't do that. Maybe put it in the garage, right? Move some boxes to the side and pull it into the garage if you have to. Or, recognize that maybe the Bluetooth option isn't the best option anymore and go back to whatever it is that the manufacturer supplied you with, a card or a fob or something along that line.
Yeah, and it's super interesting if you think across a whole spectrum of security and cybersecurity, so much of the risk is related to ease of use for the end user. I think about like cloud configurations are set to work easily when people first try these technologies so that they become adopters, but they're often the worst kind of configurations from a security standpoint. And even things like file previews on computers are the kind of places where attackers will have malicious bits of code that they figure out how to run during that preview process. So it's fascinating that by trying to make the lives easier for everybody, we make it less secure.
Yeah, but that's the way it's always been, right? It's a cat and mouse game. Cat, mouse, and dog, I suppose, right? So, security professionals are stuck between users who want it to be easy and convenient and attackers who also want it to be easy and convenient so that they can compromise it.
And I think we touched on this a little bit already, but it's something we spoke about leading up to this interview. And that was one of the big concerns with EVs is privacy and how much metadata and data is leaked about users. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So part of if you look at EVs and cars in general, not least a component of this journey that we're on with regard to electric vehicles is a push towards semi-autonomous vehicles. And there's a couple of arguments there, and it's not really necessarily worth unpacking. But as part of that, they have a voracious appetite for data. How is the vehicle operating? How are people using the vehicle? Where is the vehicle going? What is it doing, especially when the driver is ostensibly not in full control of the vehicle, and so on and so forth. And so they hoover up all of the data they can get, all of the telemetry information available. They will collect that information and do data analytics in ad nauseum with that data. Now, unfortunately, I say unfortunately, I gave it oxygen, so I'm going to commit to it. Unfortunately, data is also very valuable out on the open market. So they can sell a good portion of that information for targeted advertising and data, aggregation purposes. It's an industry that I despise the existence of. I'll commit to saying that as well, but it's the reality that information is out there. And so as we've added cameras and microphones and sensors to vehicles, pulling in that information, in a lot of cases, we either don't know or don't know the extent of what the vehicle is capable of collecting. And it's got good use cases. We can find a rationale for things, such as in every Tesla, there's a tiny little camera above the rear view mirror that can see the whole cabin of the vehicle. That's a little jarring for folks like us initially. The same thing as the webcam. Whenever we'd open up a new laptop since 2004, 2005, we'd put a little piece of tape over the camera. Same thing in a vehicle now. So they are perfectly capable of collecting data that we might not be aware of, or might not be aware of the extent of that capability. I'm also going to add something here as well, that there is a drive toward, no pun intended, there's a drive towards smart roadways. The idea here is that we can get so many efficiencies with regard to traffic control, traffic flow, maybe load balancing of routes between destinations. Now, Google does some of that using our smartphones with their Google Maps application. But the idea is that we can be so much more efficient with that if we have smart roads. If the car communicates with the road and vice versa, we get so much information that we can use for efficiency purposes around a metro area. Well, that's all well and good, but that also means that we're going to be transferring data about the vehicle to the roadway system and those who operate those systems. But legislators and state governments think the juice is worth the squeeze. And so it's also pushing vehicle manufacturers toward, let's get these vehicles up to speed. Gosh, again, I'm so sorry, that does feel like a pun as well, so that they can take advantage of those technological advances and communicate freely with those systems. Now, it's also insurance providers drive some of that as well, and law enforcement. If a car is stolen, going back to the idea of a Bluetooth relay attack, can I remotely stop that vehicle in an instant without engaging a service like OnStar or something similar, right? Can I just shut that vehicle down by way of its communication with the very road that it's on? And at a minimum, if I can't stop it, at least I know where it is at all times, right? So I think it's going to get worse long before it gets better. I have the general sense too, as a practitioner, that we're in the minority. We care about privacy way more than the aggregate, in the general public. I think some of it is ignorance, but some of it also is that people have just shrugged it off. It just is what it is. All of my life, everybody's going to have all of my data. What am I going to do about it? It's fine. Forget about it.
Yeah, I think one of the cases I read about too, and maybe you read this one as well, it was Bluetooth data being leaked between the smart tires in the vehicle. I guess there was no wired connection there to prevent having to put in a mechanism to keep the tire connected. And that was something an attacker was able to just sort of walk up to a car and start pulling that data out of the tires.
Yeah, tire pressure monitoring systems. Brilliant idea. Solving a problem that I felt like we could have just been a bit more diligent about, but so ubiquitous now.
Mm-hmm. Another interesting angle I'd love to touch in this conversation, and I think it's one you've written about, is the supply chain risk involved in the manufacturing of vehicles. I think we caught a bit of this in the chip shortage around 2020, 2021, but the rabbit hole goes much deeper. Can you outline the risk for us here, Mike?
Oh, yeah, of course. If you think of a vehicle, and we don't think about this often, but I'm going to pick on GM, or actually I'll continue to pick on, no, I can't pick on Tesla in this regard. I'm going to pick on GM, for example. Largely because General Motors has been around again since 1912. Chevy has been around since 1912. And every vehicle is made up of components, thousands of components. Now, GM has assembly plants, but they don't necessarily have a large manufacturing apparatus. And I want to be careful about how I separate those out for the viewers. It's one thing to take parts and assemble them together. I'm going to bolt an engine into a car. The engine is already assembled. It's made of thousands of parts itself, right? From pistons and rods and crankshaft, block. The heads are comprised of many moving parts, etc. But the engine itself is assembled when I put it into the vehicle, right? Well, there's a manufacturing process for every one of those individual pieces. GM has thousands of vendors, thousands of suppliers, and everybody creates a thing. They have a group of suppliers for windshields. The name of the company is, I'm going to remember it as soon as I get off of this call, Pilkington. Pilkington is a major manufacturer of windshields. They make aftermarket windshields. Oftentimes, if you go to get your windshield replaced, it's going to be a Pilkington windshield. They also provide windshields to OEMs. So they come off the assembly line with that same manufacturer's windshields. They don't make cars, but they do make windshields. And so what we have is an opportunity for compromising either the availability of, or the integrity of, or the confidentiality associated with any of those individual pieces in order to launch an attack against a specific vehicle. Let's say I hate Tesla. As the owner of one, sometimes I do, right? But if I hate Tesla enough that I want to inflict some pain on Tesla and Tesla's owners, I might try to find a way to compromise not Tesla, not Tesla's factory, but maybe a component that goes into one of those vehicles, right? Everything is fair game. Tires, seats, maybe even the software that goes into the way the vehicle operates. That's an easier target than taking on a major corporation like Tesla or General Motors or Ford, et cetera. Bob's stamping plant has one warehouse in a suburb near Detroit. They don't have sophisticated controls. They'll be easy to take down, right? So Supply chain risk, I think has always been there for us, but it really came to the fore, over the last couple of years when we started seeing actual legitimate, significant attacks on supply chains.
Yeah, an academic attack that I was reading about was the researchers had found a vulnerability in Bosch wrenches that were popular with car makers. So it's a type of digital torque wrench that is used on the assembly line to make sure the bolts are tightened to the manufacturer's specifications and stuff. And in the theoretical attack that they identified could be to make the wrenches report a certain torque when it was actually applying a different torque to the bolts on the car engines and stuff. So this would could cause accidents, recalls, and even shut down production. So I thought that there's definitely some room for some sneaky stuff there that could cause huge knock-on effects.
And it might escape notice. A car could get all the way into somebody's possession before we realize that a bolt that should have been at 120 foot-pounds was really at 98 foot-pounds. But the engineering team understands that the threshold where there's undue risk on that bolt is at 109 foot-pounds, right? And so even small, presumably innocuous changes in those calibrations could have super deleterious effect. And maybe if I can draw a parallel, if you'll permit me, it's not a technology-based issue, but Toyota got in a lot of trouble at the end of the I'm going to say the early 10s, right, where they had the unintended acceleration issue with their vehicles. That wasn't a problem with technology. It wasn't that the throttle plate, even though they are drive-by-wire, not drive-by-cable anymore, it wasn't that the throttle plate was stuck open. It was literally that the floor mat and the gas pedal were too close to each other. And the gas pedal was getting caught up in the floor mat. And when you're driving and your foot is pushing a thing down, it's difficult to pull it back up without contorting yourself under the steering wheel. Unfortunately, people died. But the fix was to cut 1/8 of an inch off the bottom of the gas pedal. Now try to imagine, this is a very physical, very almost caveman sort of scenario. But try to imagine making very minor, the equivalent of 1/8 of an inch off the bottom of a gas pedal changes to things like bolt torque in an engine, out of an engine, in a car, body panels, suspension components, braking components, whatever that could be. How deleterious that would be for drivers out on the road, at any time. And it could take years. It could take, forever for that to surface. But if we traced it back to that one, torque wrench that maybe shouldn't have been connected to the internet, we'd feel pretty bad about that.
Yeah. Oh, wow. More things to be worried about.
Right?
So I saved this one for near the end because this one is just wild to me. Apparently, Volkswagen has decided to integrate ChatGPT into their new EVs. Apparently, ChatGPT will support the vehicle's voice assistant, which can, and I quote, automatically prioritize whether a vehicle function should be executed, a destination searched, or the temperature adjusted. It wasn't clear to me what exactly a vehicle function was, but it seems like the beginning of a bad idea. Do you have any thoughts on this one for us, Mike?
I do, and I'll start out by playing devil's advocate. A vehicle function could be anything from picking a particular radio station to, climate control, temperature selection, to actuation of the ABS, the anti-lock braking system, and so on. And so I can see a case. I can force myself to make a case for a system like ChatGPT or something similar to make certain decisions, right? It's disadvantageous for us to take a left turn right now because there's a wall right next to us. That's a bad idea. So I could see locking a driver out from making those sorts of choices from a safety perspective. I could also see that system being used for collision avoidance, right? Try to imagine if we give ChatGPT and other AI tools access to the entirety of the world, almost literally, we could imagine a case where ChatGPT recognizes that there's significant traffic in front of us and reroute navigation accordingly. Or again, in the notion of collision avoidance, if ChatGPT is able to understand that there's a vehicle traveling at a high rate of speed perpendicular to our vector, it could make a decision. And that's That's okay. I could see that being more advanced than some of the more, I'm going to say, young in their trajectory proprietary systems that we have in place in cars today. I still don't like it because we haven't learned this yet, that decisions that computers make on their own can also be influenced by outside entities to make contrary choices fairly quickly, right? So like we're talking about, hackers and people that are compromising systems, torque wrenches. The torque wrench should be dumb in my estimation. It should just be set to a certain value and hit that value every time until it wears out, and then we replace it. And the one we replace it with is also dumb. But I'm old and sort of scared of change sometimes, right? So if there are controls around digital torque wrenches, great, awesome. Let's go ahead and use that. I could see the efficiencies that might be gained there. ChatGPT and similar AI tools in this delivery mechanism still scare me enough to make me nervous and really not want one, right? Unless we put some sort of division between ChatGPT telling me, if I'm driving along and say, hey, ChatGPT, what was the number one hit of March, first week of March in 1993? Play that song. Okay, cool. That's kind of novel. That's kind of neat. That's entertaining. But I do not need ChatGPT or something similar having control over my vehicle. That's not it's not something I'm interested in quite yet.
Yeah, the kinetic potential there is potentially life-ending, and as you mentioned, there is ways to poison models, and these models have been shown to hallucinate, not always produce predictable results. So yeah, I think we should tread very cautiously, and I hope that this is just an attempt at Volkswagen trying to get some press and marketing coverage, given their bold vision of the future, right?
It'll always be effective that way, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the last ones I have for you is, there seems to be a lot of stuff here. The industry is growing like crazy. Do you think as the industry evolves, we will see a field of cybersecurity that develops that specializes in electric vehicle infrastructure and vehicles in general?
Yeah, I think we already have it. I want to give the EV market credit in that because it started out as a technology concern first, manufacturing and vehicle concern second. I think that there's genuinely, I mean this with all sincerity, there's genuinely folks in that stream who have the best of intentions. They understand the importance of data protection. They understand the landscape, at least in as great a scale as we would expect professionals in this space to have. And so they've done their level best, while balancing the concerns of the bean counters, in the corporate office. So I'm heartened, but I'm also frustrated because I think that especially these newer organizations, maybe by necessity, maybe I could be argued into this is the only way it's ever going to be, but I think that they have a tendency to beta test on drivers, on owners, right? We're going to roll out a new function and we tested it for a couple of weeks, but we're just going to see how it goes for consumers of the product because we can just do over-the-air updates. And if it doesn't go well, we can just issue another update. That's the Microsoft Windows model, right? Now I've called out Tesla and Microsoft. I am so sorry. But I think that's my frustration. I would surely love this, whatever this is, whatever new feature or function, etc. I would love for that to have been more well baked before it was put out. And I have a small example for you. All electric vehicles in the US are required to emit a sound when they're traveling at low speed, for example, through a parking lot. The idea being that pedestrians can hear the vehicle and get out of the way, right, or move to the side, et cetera. They need to be able to hear the vehicle for safety, for pedestrian safety regulations. There's a specific sound or specific characteristics of that sound set by the NTSB. Tesla issued a fun, neat little update that said that you could leverage the speaker under the hood of their vehicles to, make noises, like old car horn sounds, goat screaming, sounds, whatever it is, right? Yeah. And you could do that, as you're driving along. They got in trouble because if that sound is playing, the sound that the vehicle is supposed to be emitting as it travels through the parking lot cannot be heard. And that's a compromise of pedestrian safety. Now, I would argue that if you're playing a sound at all, you've addressed the intent of that rule. But the government didn't see it that way. So Tesla had to initiate an immediate update again to follow up to disable that sound if the vehicle is in motion. But those are sort of some of the things that I feel like somebody at home base should have picked up on that, should have said, wait, hold up. Before we do this, let's go check the regs, right? And, again, putting those two things together, great professionals, understand security, understand the importance of safety and security and technology and so on, still testing on drivers and owners. And I'm not as much of a fan of that.
Yeah, move fast and break things probably shouldn't apply to the automotive industry.
No, probably not.
All right, so this is the final one I have for you. It's the one I ask of everybody who comes on the show. It can be as wide or as narrow as you want. Do you have any predictions for the future of cybersecurity?
I predict more alignment with privacy. Data privacy is a bit of a passion project for me. And it's staggering to me how over the years, instead of being, a Venn diagram being two circles, security and data privacy, now it just looks like one blurry circle. And so I think that that's going to continue to be a thing, that data protection and data privacy protection will start to convene, especially because we have 12 states now who have enacted privacy legislation and several more who are discussing it. And so we're very, very close to the point where we will have privacy legislation that might trample on or at least overlap with security legislation. And so I think cybersecurity practitioners are going to be forced into also being privacy practitioners.
Very interesting. Yeah, and that aligns with some of the stuff we've been seeing, a bunch of federal regulations related to healthcare funding and in other federal organizations. So I think cybersecurity is definitely going to become more prominent and enforced mandate for many companies and organizations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, Mike. This was a great conversation. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. I haven't purchased my first EV yet, but I have no doubt it's on the horizon. And I'll have lots to think about when I do.
Absolutely. If I can be of any help, let me know.
All right. Take care, sir.
All right. You too. Thank you.